Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary.
Remember, all that wander in the desert are not lost. We hope that you know
You are seen,
you are heard,
and you are loved. Hello, desert dwellers, and welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. That's kind of a fun way to introduce the podcast.
Hello, Laura.
Anyway, I'm Karl Forehand, and I'm here with Karl Forehand, and we're just here for another conversation, I guess, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we just we start chatting, and then we're like, maybe we should do a podcast episode about that. So here we are.
So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, it's interesting because last night when one of our daughters got to our house, we were talking about like parents these days, not all parents, but some parents, like our daughters who are parents, and how they aren't raising their children's in a religious environment. Mm-hmm. And to me that's fascinating. I'm like, I wonder how you do that, because I feel like we were always immersed in religion. And so it's just something we did when we had kids. It was like, you start taking them to church and you do all the things. And so
You say we were immersed. In the 1980s, when all this religious rights stuff came out and James Dobson, Focus on the Family, and all of that mess, when that came out, our son was born in 91.
Right.
And the last one of our children was born in 96. So we were absorbing all of that thought process without really thinking about it,
Right.
I think when you're raising children, it's that you're so busy you can't hardly breathe. Especially you were. And because I was in ministry, starting right after the last one was born, I started in ministry. And then I didn't have time, and you bore a lot of the brunt of that. So that our children are raised well is largely due to you.
There was always something, though, even though we were in the thick of church and all the religious, James Dobson stuff and all that, there was always something that was I was distasteful to me, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so, even some of the things, that Dobson proposed, I was like, I'm not doing that,
Right.
I didn't really. And now we did, spank our kids. And we've since talked about that and how we regret that. But I didn't feel like every disobedient act that was the punishment that needed to come down was some sort of corporal punishment. So I don't know, there was something in the back of my head that was like, I don't know if I'm buying into all of this, but again, it was just one of those things, it was the culture, being in the Southern Baptist Church. I think they kind of hung on to Dobson's words and things like that. So it was always kind of there, but
yeah, not just Dobson, but Bill Gothard's influence kind of bled into everything.
Really, it did. When we hear stories, I'm just like,
I kind of remember that a little bit. That sounds
a lot like some of the stuff we, had to deal with. So, So anyway, our daughter wasn't really, she was like, when her comment was, well, I don't think about religion all the time like you guys do.
Yeah.
And it's not that we think about it all the time necessarily. It's just that I think we reflect on it a lot because it was such a big part of who we were for such a long time. But so she was, not really, I don't know. She was, just, it wasn't really her thing to want to be on the podcast, just talk about that particular thing. So we thought we would hop on and try to muddle our way through.
Yeah, try to piece together some of our understanding that may or may not be helpful. And that's kind of the way it's gone. You know, after you have your first child, you think, well, here's 10 things that absolutely will work. And then you have your second child.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, here's a couple of things that you might want to try. And then after the third one, you're just kind of like, I'm not giving parenting advice to anybody.
Well, and that's the downside of like parenting books and things like that, is that we're trying to put every single child into a box. Mm-hmm. And that's not really fair, because they all are unique and have their own personalities and their own strengths and their own weaknesses. And, you know, I don't think we can look at Dobson or any other, you know, person that wrote a parenting book and go, this is going to work for every single one of my kids, and just, you know, make it a blanket, you know.
Because if you have a real compliant child for your first child, you could very easily, you know, go, this is the way to do it, you know. Mm-hmm. And then you have a middle child that's stubborn, and I
like to say she's strong-willed, and that has always served her very well.
That served her very well. And then our third one just thought on a different level.
I think we thought she was like timid and compliant, and she is more soft-spoken, but she absolutely speaks her mind.
Yeah, we've written about that a little bit.
Yeah, and will stand up for injustice and things like that.
So, first of all, I wanted to go through some of the things that religion or high control parents, so kind of high control parents or high control religion, might how it might influence parenting. And don't just, like, if you're not in Bill Gothard, or you're not in a Baptist church, or you're not in what you know is a high control situation, just bear with me, because you may have at least parts of this in any religious type thing or in any high control family. Mm-hmm. And high control mainly comes from fear.
Right.
Could come from the fact maybe you're a drug user or something, and you're just so afraid you're going to mess someone else up that you get high control in the wrong ways and so on. So just keep that in mind as we go through these, that these are some things that can come out of it. There's some things that can happen because of religion, because of high control families, because of fear. But it's the idea that you're incomplete, or the worm theology. Mm-hmm. It says, so, okay, without our system, without our belief system, you're not really worth much.
Right.
You know, I think some kids learn differently, wouldn't you say? I mean,
oh yeah,
do you have,
for sure,
have, like, you know, when kids come into school, they may be labeled as something, you know, where it's just that they learn different and they process the world differently, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think sometimes, maybe in a direct or an indirect way, they've heard messages, you know, negative messages about themselves, and so they have internalized that and believe that. I have a student in my class this year who, you know, that's his big thing, is to say, I can't read. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, he can read. Mm-hmm. You know, we're just all at different places in our reading development. But somewhere along the line, he has either heard that or he's somehow internalized that. So, you know, yeah, but definitely, I mean, there's just, you know, kids learn in different ways, and you just have to kind of figure out their way of learning.
Unfortunately, religion tends to highlight some of that stuff, that you're not in this box, so you're in that box. Mm-hmm. There's only two boxes.
Right.
And if you're not in that box, and another thing is you need the right beliefs to be whole. Right. So, you know, a lot of religions say, well, we don't force any children to adopt our religion, but until you do, you're really not in the club. You're really not one of us. And so you're really that other, that less than, that, subpar member,
Right.
And so kids can be deeply influenced by those type of things. You don't believe like us, so you're the other and you're much worse. Maybe, just take adults in a Sunday school class. If we're sitting in a Sunday school class like we used to go to for young adults, and there's a couple that says, well, we really don't believe that, and we're kind of into karma and that kind of afterlife.
I'm not sure who had ever heard that, but I get what you're saying.
Well, I mean, as a pastor, I had one couple, and the lady would tell me that.
Really?
Well, I'm into karma, and
okay.
If I told you her name, you would know her, but I don't want to say it online.
No, that's fine.
But once there's kind of a couple of differences, then religion is very apt to kind of categorize you as something else, as something other. And really that's something, we need to recognize the differences in our children and account for those, but it's real easy to label people. Even to label them as smart, or whatever. I
think our brains just try to keep everything organized. We want to keep everything organized. So if we can label, if we can categorize people, if we can kind of pigeonhole, put them in a box, then it makes us feel safer.
Another thing is, if you believe the right things, then it's magic. You're going to be okay. Just by believing, you're going to be. And so we have different philosophies out there in life, mantras, religious beliefs, affirmations, all those things, which some of those things can be helpful to a certain extent. But when we believe in that magic, then it stops us from working on ourselves. It stops us from just believing that we're not favored, believing that we don't have the right solution or the magic potion or whatever. So religion kind of plays into that.
So go a little deeper into that. What do you mean by magic?
Well, for me, magic means...
Because I always think magic is outside of religion. I mean, but it's really not. But if you're an evangelical, you wouldn't touch the word magic, I'm sure, but a lot of what we do inside the church is magic.
But that's exactly what they teach, that you are back to the worm. You're a worm, you're worthless, you're going to hell. You deserve eternal conscious torment. But if you believe this one thing and say this, then like magic, you're transformed and you're something else now. You're a totally different thing. And that's, we know for a fact that doesn't necessarily transform your behavior.
Right.
First of all. And we know it doesn't make you more intelligent. We know it doesn't do anything like that. But they would say, well, that's an eternal kind of spiritual thing. But then, we tend to... and magically someday Jesus is going to wipe out the earth and create a new one. He's coming back and everything will be new and all that. That's all magical thinking.
Right.
And it avoids the hard work of life. You want your students to understand that there's a process, that you don't know something and this is how we're going to learn it. And that's going to be some
practice and
to practice and work at it.
Yeah.
And most things in life are like that. At the same time, I don't deny that there's things we can't understand.
Right.
Right. I consider myself a mystic, so I believe that you experience things you don't always understand, and it's not always just a put your nose to the plow and then you'll understand, or you'll get it, or you'll get riches or whatever.
Right.
But magical thinking can a lot of times inhibit us.
Yeah. Well, and I also think too that that comfortable with not knowing. And I think that's why we have to have that magical thinking, even in religion, because it's always like, well, we can't understand it now, but one day we will. And, that futuristic, mystical, or not mystical, but magical thinking. And sometimes I just think it's okay to go, I don't know, and it's okay that I don't know, and it's not going to be a detriment to who I am if I don't know.
So we could go into all that. Incantations and witchcraft are not that much different than prayers.
That's what I was saying.
In Christianity,
right? I mean, you're not going to get an evangelical to admit that, but it's very true. Yeah,
and you're cursing, blessing, those kind of things that we totally believed in evangelicalism, and to different degrees, other religions, non-evangelicals, still practice some of those things. Some of those things, they may not be in walk the sawdust trail to get saved, but there's confirmation, there's infant baptism. There's lots of things where we're trying to invoke the magic,
right?
And sometimes that's harmful.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's a phrase that we used a lot in the religions we were a part of, and that is that God has a purpose for you. And it's used almost extensively. Today, when I said, my famous saying is, in my mind, anyhow, the thing I say all the time is, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace. And someone said, well, be where Jesus wants you to be, and be who Jesus wants you to be, and then you'll have the peace that passes all understanding. Well, that sounds kind of holy, but the depth of my experience in Christianity says that whoever you tell God has a purpose for your life, they spend the rest of their life not finding it.
Right. And
most of them would admit, if they were honest, and they sometimes were, I can't find this purpose that God has for me. It eludes me. I never heard his voice.
Yep.
I might read scripture, and that might, kind of tie something together. And then I go out and try to experience it, and I realize that's not God's purpose. And those people come back frustrated, and so what they do is they adopt the pastor's plan and purpose, or the church's plan and purpose for their life.
Well, and in my experience, especially as of late, is we can sit there and say, be where Jesus wants you to be, and, be who Jesus wants you to be. But you know as well as I do that in churches, that is all dependent on your denomination and what your denomination thinks Jesus believed or said or did. And to me, I don't know.
According to the Bible, Jesus didn't want people to be in church.
Exactly. Well, and Jesus was, from what I understand of Jesus, he had a lot of compassion and love for everyone, and didn't put conditions on that. And I don't see that. I don't see that as part of today's church. So if that's what the church thinks Jesus is, then I don't want to be where Jesus is and who Jesus thinks I should be.
Right.
And trying to find that when we were inside the walls of the church never did bring me peace that passes all understanding, or whatever.
So our friend Kyle, that he wouldn't mind us telling some of this, because he repeats it almost every time we talk, that he was, because of the religion he was in, told, God has his hand on you. And so because he spoke when he was a youth and got some attention and so on, they pushed him into that. You need to do, it would be a travesty if you didn't do what God has planned for you to do, which basically meant what we think you should do, and where we think you should go. And of course, we're God-fearing Christians, so we know, and
if you think about us as parents, I mean, we kind of did that too, right? Out of fear, because we wanted our kids to go in a certain direction based on what the church was saying, and it wasn't necessarily what it didn't take into account what they wanted.
Right.
Their own individual expectations for their own lives.
Yeah, exactly. The point is, when we start to do that for other people, we can just as easily lead them down the wrong path as the right. And they need some time to figure out who they are, which religion also doesn't encourage you to do. They need to know who they are, and then they can determine where they're going. And Lily, our youngest, she was valedictorian, but did a speech about, how do you expect me, less than 2 decades old, to know where I'm going, to know my purpose and plan? And if you just listen to what everybody else tells you, then how is that being authentic and so on?
But we do get a lot of pushback. I mean, I remember when our son JD wanted to, he told us, like, I'm moving to Taiwan and, I'm going to live there. I'm going to teach there. And I had several people say to me, to my face, I don't know how you can let your son do that. How can you let him go that far away? But my response to them was, how can I not?
Right.
How can I not let him pursue his dreams? Because it's not about me. It's not about me. It's about what his desire is for his life and what brings him fulfillment and happiness. And, by me saying that doesn't mean that there aren't days that I miss him so much that it hurts or I cry or whatever. But, I can have my feelings and let him go.
Yeah. And too often we say, well, I don't think that's God's purpose for you,
Right.
Because I'm afraid. And I don't know how that's going to turn out for you, and I don't want it to turn out.
Well, and we're thinking about ourselves. If you think about it, when we say that, I don't think that's God's plan for you. First of all, I'm like, why the hell is God telling you what my plans are for my life? Like, shouldn't he be telling me that?
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Don't get me all riled up now, Carl.
And it still assumes another, and that we know more than you do, and we're more in touch with God than you are.
But it doesn't even have to be like, quote unquote, holy people, pastors that are telling you that. I mean, these were just everyday people that were telling me, like, oh, I don't know, I don't know how you can let him do that. And people just everyday people will tell you, I don't think that's God's purpose for your life.
I think anytime that we have those thoughts, I think we should examine that and say, is this based on fear? Is this about, I'm afraid of what will happen? I don't know what will happen. I can't predict it. It's, and so because of that, and a good way
to know is, like, if your thoughts are racing and crashing into each other and just going all over the place, then you're probably operating out of fear or some sort of, concern. And I'm not saying that that's not valid, but maybe that's when mindfulness can come into play, and take a breath and really, like, do some journaling or something to help you process that. We have
several times gone back and taken inventory. I'm always sensitive, thinking no one wants me in their group, and then the other day we were kind of taking inventory of that, and you're reminding me that, aren't you glad you're not in that guy's group, and that guy's group, and that guy's group?
As much as you wanted to be
in them. As much as I really thought that was God's will at the time, and that but it was based on, if I can get in the right group, then everything will be okay. Just like if I could have the right beliefs, that'll be magical. If I could just find God's purpose and do that, then I'm guaranteed success and blessing and everything because of that. But then we even get that way with political ideas. This is our political idea, our stance, that we don't want children exposed to books. We're afraid of that.
Yeah.
We don't want them exposed to LGBTQ and so on. That's the next step down here on our notes. But political idea, this is the only option. If it doesn't happen, the world's coming to an end.
Right.
That's how politics has gotten. You know, Trump stood up at the January 6th and said, if you want to have a country left, you got to go fight. And it almost did destroy our country, but not because they didn't, but because they did. And we get those single-minded, one-quote theology things that rally people together, that otherize other people. And I think we just do those kind of things with our kids. If they, you know, we may have had a time when we thought if they don't turn out Republican, you know, if they're too liberal, they're going to have, you know, it's going to be problems. And most of that stuff we were wrong about.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So.
Definitely.
So just like evangelicals today worry about exposure to LGBTQ, books that shouldn't be read, which a lot of that is just a regurgitation of past stuff that we used to worry about. We worry about they'll get too much religion. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think they will be exposed to a lot more. You know, if people are worried about someone reading Catcher in the Rye, they could get it online in 5 seconds.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. They
will be exposed, and especially if you tell them that's a banned book, that you can't read that.
Right.
They're going to read that. I read J.D. Salinger because I wasn't supposed to, you know.
Well, sure. We're curious, and we want
high school, going into college.
Yeah. We want to, when someone tells us we can't, you know, I wouldn't say it's a defiant thing as much as it is a curiosity thing.
Right. I want to know for myself.
Yeah. And you should be able to know for yourself and create your own opinions and have your own critical thinking on those matters instead of what everybody else is telling you need to think about those things.
Before someone criticizes us, you know, we're not saying do that with a 5-year-old. Not that a 5-year-old can see everything. There are kind of stages to that, and all parents protect their kids to some extent. But you just have to be open, and the things that are too much for them, you have to explain, and you have to help them process it sometimes, right?
Yeah, I think in a healthy way too. So, you know, being careful not to instill perhaps your fear into them.
Well, with all that, I think in the book Parenting Deconstructed and in some of our other writings, we've incorporated these things that still kind of tend to be just the basic things that we thought we did well. And what we've talked about mostly already up to this point is moving away from fear-based everything.
Right.
Fear-based religion, fear-based politics, fear-based parenting, right?
And I think we continue to move away from that. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say, like, I don't ever experience fear when it comes to, you know, my children. But I've learned to, when I'm feeling those things, you know, try to take inventory, like you said, but also have discussions with them. Granted, our kids are adults now, so I can do that. And I understand, you know, you can't necessarily do that when you have, you know, a first or second grade child, but continuing to be aware, I think for me, is a really important thing. Being aware, am I operating out of a sense of fear?
Yeah, and for me, I think that fear-based thing was, it felt like a positive thing. It felt like I was taking positive actions, but it was not positive actions based on, you know, deep down intuition. It was based on either what everyone else thought or what everyone else taught me to be afraid of. You know, and it was always that we don't want our kids to get pregnant. You know, we don't want their name in the paper. You know,
right.
I remember when JD got in trouble with the principal for cussing, and that was a big deal. And finally, just accepted it and said, "Well, I think I was cussing. at his age.
He was like in high school, wasn't he?
Right.
Yeah. I've had kids in 3rd grade.
But the principal tried to shame him, you know, and
this principal being one that has like an incredible potty mouth. So, but he's an adult, so it's okay, I guess.
Yeah. And so the fear, you know, since we were operating that way in religion, you know, what are we afraid of? What do we want to protect our children from, and so on? Just, I think led me down too many paths that weren't helpful. And there were things I ended up apologizing for later, or having to correct later, and things like that. Fear can't, you know, you can't walk through life with your head in the clouds, not paying attention to anything and not being mindful of the things around you, right? It's not saying don't care about anything, or don't have any morals, or, you know, don't recognize that there's certain dangers in the world.
Sure.
It's not thinking that way at all. But you can't let fear be primary, right? It's a concern. It's something you have to consider. You know, it's the dangers of life, but it can't, you know, it can't rule the situation.
Right.
Right. And when it did, I think it just led us down the wrong path, and probably taught our children in some ways to function that way.
Yeah.
Even though they don't really. I mean, I don't want to speak for them and say, you know, what their fears are and things like that. But for the most part, they're pretty fearless. That's actually our next topic. So one of the things I thought was important was to teach them to be brave. And really all I did was try to be brave myself, just like you were, and model that. But also we had a little phrase called just be brave, you know, when they had to have a tooth out or something like that. Usually I got that duty. And so I'd say be brave to our oldest daughter, who I heard at one point telling her sister to be brave. And then now we see that in all of our kids and even our grandchildren now. Is that kind of that injunction to, okay, I know this is scary, but be brave. And I think that's important, right?
I think it's also important, you know, to have that balance. Like, it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be concerned. It's okay to maybe be anxious about something. And, you know, show bravery at the same time. Or maybe you don't show bravery in that moment, but, you know, maybe down the road you do. So, you know, like, we're going to take something pretty generic, but just like going on a roller coaster or something. If your child, you know, says they don't want to go on it, that should be good enough. Like, I don't think we should guilt them and be like, oh, just be brave, I'll be right with you. And, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think you have to allow them, like, not feed into their fears, but if you're not ready in this moment, that's okay too. You know, sometimes bravery is speaking up for what you don't want to do. It's not always doing something that you're uncomfortable doing. Sometimes bravery means you say no.
Yeah, I think it's important that, so JD, my son, was kind of my best friend for many years, and may still be my best friend. But, you know, I think he said, you know, one of the things I think he wrote in one of the backs of that one book, he said the thing I admired about my dad was his, you know, that he stands up for causes that he believes in, you know, and things like that.
Right.
That's how we can model bravery, you know. Anytime we advocate something we've been dealing with lately, advocating for abuse survivors, you know, at some point someone has to stand up and say something and take a stand. And when you do, you're going to pay for that. You know, you're going to suffer a little bit for that, or whatever you're gonna have to kind of put your reputation on the line and so on, and that takes being brave. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're going to sue me or come after me or try to discredit me,
right,
or whatever. But there's times you just need to be brave.
Yeah.
Right. And brave is not bravado. Brave is not just running over people. It's not all those things we see, in toxic forms of religion and so on. It's not any of that. But sometimes, bravery could be maybe you're in one of those high control religions and you have to say, I don't believe this anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm going to question it, and I may have to walk away from it. Another thing that I think we taught our children was to learn to think for themselves, right? And there wasn't a time when we actually sit down at the kitchen table and said, okay, you guys are going to start thinking for yourself.
Right.
Doesn't really work like that, right? But we allowed them to have opinions, and I think, again, maybe that's something we kind of modeled, that we were trying to learn new things, and it eventually we started challenging. And I think at every church that we were in, I had to stand up to people eventually and challenge them and think for myself. And sometimes that didn't go great, and I think they saw that. They saw how people reacted. So it was, in a sense, me being brave, but also thinking for myself instead of just following the group think. But I think it's important to teach our children how to think for themselves, right?
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. And I'm not really sure how we did that. They always tell us that we instilled in them critical thinking, and I'm not quite sure how we did that. I don't know.
I agree.
But somehow. And maybe, too, I feel like the friends that they had in the various churches, I don't know, I think there's something about that generation that they were starting to just be like, I don't know if I buy all this hook, line, and sinker. And so I'm sure they had friends with their conversations with their friends as well, and maybe they just felt that sense of camaraderie with their friends and were able to speak their mind to us. I don't know. I do think you need to have that open dialogue and let your kids, share what they're thinking and share what they're believing, and be okay with that. It doesn't have to exactly match mine.
Yeah. I think this is one of those cases when our kids taught us also. We in some ways followed them. JD was 5 or 6 when I started preaching, and I would go up to Iowa and little small churches, and it was just a little church, and he would go with me and watch me preach. And then at most places we were, he was the sound guy up until he graduated from high school. So he sat in on every service and watched what went on and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so somewhere in there he caught that. But I remember one time when he was maybe just out of high school or just into college, and he said to me, when I disagreed with him or I tried to tell him, what to think, he said, well, Dad, you might want to consider this, and he spoke in that kind of language. And I think that's really good for children, that, well, maybe you should consider this side also, or what about this other side? Instead of saying, well, this is what we believe. I think that's one of the most detrimental things you can do, because then there's shame, control, pressure. Then they don't want to talk about them, and not that they weren't others of our children have said, I'm afraid to talk to you about this a little bit.
Yep.
And that's something we never hoped for, but there was there's always that tension.
But sometimes when that happens, because that did happen with me and Abby. And there is, she did say, well, I'm kind of scared to talk to you about this. And like that kind of like, my heart sank, I don't want my kids to be afraid to talk to me because they think I'm going to judge them or, disown them or anything like that. Mm-hmm. That was kind of a wake-up call for me in a really good way. Like, I'm glad she felt brave enough to say, mm-hmm. I'm kind of nervous to talk to you about this subject because, I know what you and Dad believe about it. And that really kind of opened my eyes and caused me to really start thinking differently about the topic that we were talking about.
Yeah. So sometimes let them lead you. Lily also had a important impact on me a couple of times when she confronted me about the ways I was handling junior high and early high school, which was not good. It was so much that we had never experienced before and just didn't know how to handle. And she helped me, during times like that, if I was willing to listen.
We have to stop, especially as our kids get older, stop thinking we are the ultimate, answer person, ultimate authority, and start listening to, what our kids have to say. And I think the more we put up walls and think, it's my way or the highway, the more we shut down so many great conversations that we could be having.
Yeah, and kids today have more information than we do. Even they're better at retrieving that information. They know, and it may be worth discussing instead of lecturing. As I said before, what helped me most was the nun that said, none of us is right, and to realize that, then we can keep discovering and stop trying to control.
Right.
And fear and control just almost never works in parenting. It may get you immediate results. It may control the situation.
But what's the outcome?
But the outcome is not good. Yeah.
Fear, because and which ultimately fractures relationships. I'm not saying you can't have a relationship, but it's just not, I don't know. I just don't want a relationship with my kids that's based on fear.
Yeah.
And control.
So the last thing that we wanted to touch on was something you had pointed out in your contribution to those writings that we were talking about. And it happened because of something that happened in your classroom, right? So the kid in your classroom said something along the lines of, I'm just stupid.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And what you wanted to say right away was, no, you're not.
No, you're not. Well, that's in fact what I did say.
Yeah.
No, you're not. I wanted to rescue him from what he was believing about himself. I mean, it's kind of like the kid in my class now that's like, I can't read. It may feel like you can't read, but read this word right here.
So what was
you can.
What was it important for you to do then, instead of just correcting him?
It's important to, validate where they are. Now, validating doesn't mean you agree with them. It doesn't mean you go, yeah, you are stupid, or no, yeah, you're right, you can't read. But it's hearing where they are in that moment, because they're working out of a part of their brain that is fearful, that is afraid of being embarrassed, or afraid of looking stupid, or maybe that's something someone has told them, so maybe there is a part of them that does believe that. Yeah, so it's important to validate them and then help them process what the truth really is about themselves. Like my student that says he can't read. Yeah. Showing him that, look, you can read. So let's go through this. You can read these words. We might have to break it apart. We might have to, dissect the word a little bit, but you can do it.
So in review, whether in religion or not, moving away from fear-based religion, politics, practices, and fear-based parenting into something better, challenging our youth to be brave, not careless, but brave, teaching them to think for themselves and validating what they're feeling and talking about what they're feeling, listening to them. As we've said, so often listening may be one of the most important things we've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
But also, maybe just a couple of sub-points here. Is it okay, it's a question, I guess, is it okay for your child to be themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay for them to be who they are?
Mm-hmm.
And, with some
person. If it's not okay with you for your child to be who they are, then you need to examine yourself more so than you need to
change them.
Change your child.
Yeah. Is it okay for them to be, and maybe that applies to our friendships, is it okay for your friend to be who they are?
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay for your spouse to be who they are?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we always trying to mold people into our vision of what they should be?
Right.
Or how they should be? And those kind of things. Does your child feel like they can trust themselves? Is it okay to be who they are? And can they trust themselves? And I believe this part is deeply affected by Christianity. And we're told not to trust ourselves. Mm-hmm. And just trust whoever's over you to tell you what to do. But in a lot of this is developing that self-assurance that I have my own intuition. Mm-hmm. I have my own connection with spirit or whatever you want to call it. I can make decisions. I can trust myself. Mm-hmm. Because...
And it's not the end of the world if you trust yourself and make a mistake.
Right.
It is not the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because religion teaches us to not trust ourselves, then when we do make a mistake, it feels so devastating, and maybe I'll just speak for myself. It always felt so incredibly devastating. Like I would just beat myself up terribly for the least little mistake that I made.
Yeah, it's so good. Well, we want to thank you guys for tuning in today. And again, please check out the YouTube channel and forward this. Help us communicate with people. We hate to just beg people online to look at our stuff. But I think there's been, in the past few months, a lot of attention, a lot of people kind of gathering around these thoughts and ideas and talking about them. We appreciate that. So, as always, be where you are. Be who you are and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary.
Remember, all that wander in the desert are not lost. We hope that you know
you are seen,
you are heard,
and you are loved.